Welcome to the Power of the Purge discussion. It's not every day that people will assemble and talk about vomiting, but here we are because in conjunction with working with a medicine like ayahuasca, the purge is awesome. It's one of the core healing properties of ayahuasca, sacred tobacco. There's multiple plants actually that are vomitivos. Most of the talk today will be focused around, bring on the vomit, I love it, will be focused around ayahuasca because she's the queen of helping us purge and release. But yeah, we'll weave in some of the other amazing plants that give us this opportunity to release in this way. The ayahuasca purge is so fascinating because it's one of the elements that people who are new to working with her are most afraid of. Because I do a lot of prep calls with people that are gearing up to work with mama for the first time. And sometimes I even have people ask, can I avoid the purge? Is it possible to not purge? So I'm like, well, why are you drinking ayahuasca if you don't want to purge? Because, well, it's not guaranteed. I'm going to talk about that in a second. It is a profound, common, and potent element of her medicine. So the best way I could describe this though is not to be afraid of it if you're against purging because maybe you've had a big night with alcohol and had the dreaded alcohol poisoning purge, which is really one of the worst feelings ever. I've been there. It's not like that. It is a release of something we have likely been carrying for a long time that we don't want anymore. And so when we talk about purging in the ayahuasca space, we call it getting well, not getting sick, getting well, because it is such an honor to get to have the opportunity to let go, to release something that has been, probably hurting us for a long time. So you want to drink ayahuasca, you want to purge down deep because it's one of the supreme gifts that she has for us. I actually had somebody show up once to ceremony with anti-nausea medication in the hopes that he could avoid purging. He took the medication and then he purged it later. So doesn't work, not at all what we want, because if we're trying to avoid the purge, we're trying to avoid healing. And that's the ayahuasca space. That's what it's all about, is working with her so that we can come back to a deeper space of wholeness, the core of healing. And so purging just happens to be one of the main ways that she helps us do this. But I think it's important to remember that the ayahuasca purge is not just vomiting. That is one of many ways that she can move energy. One of her symbols is the snake. She has Kundalini-like upward energy. And so, yes, vomiting is very much a possibility. But you might purge through laughter. That's an incredible release. It might be a good, hard cry. Yeah, I have my bucket behind me because I work with rapé, so one must always have this. Sometimes when I'm having a good, beautiful crying purge, I like to hold my bucket to catch the tears because it's just a symbol of how that too can be a beautiful release. The purge might be itching. Sometimes we just get itchy all over, and there's always symbolism in each of these of why she moves the energy in this way. For example, if you're super itchy in ceremony, she might be getting you in touch with what you're itching to do, who you're itching to be. Like there might be something symbolic. It might also be a toxin release that creates that sort of response in the body. She works on the physical, and the emotional, and the spiritual level. So it could be all of the above. So itching, phlegm, sometimes we get really phlegmy. And that's often a really beautiful release for the throat and the lungs to clear things out, nasal passages. We might purge out the other end, not to get graphic, but that absolutely can happen. Typically we say that if there's a good hard pooping purge, that's a physical release. And quite often the vomiting purge is an emotional release. That is not across the board true, but it's a good generalization. And of course, crying and laughing and emoting is clearly connected to the emotional space. But purging can also be on the level of the images, the visions that come in. Sometimes we get a lot of like rapid fire, sort of crazy digital images to purge the overstimulation that we all have coming in through our eyeballs. And she might also help us purge in that way things that we have seen that we would like to, not forget necessarily, but let go of, because eyes and the third eye, all of that holds memory. So sometimes the purging happens on that visual level because there's so much clutter happening in our minds and in our third eyes. That's how she decalcifies that too. The purging can be coughing, can be yawning. Like if you've ever been in ceremony where there's the loud guy that's like every 5 minutes, like I've totally been next to that person, but it's a purge. It's a movement of energy. So it's not so much necessarily that we're tired, it's that she's doing her thing of processing things. And so sometimes even those big yawns where we can kind of get expansive in our lungs and our respiratory system, it can move energy up and out. I've had many a purge that is just, it's energetic. In fact, it's very common for those of us that work with her a lot that when we see our bucket at the end of the night, we're like, wait, what? That's it? That's all the volume? Because sometimes we work really hard, and I'm sure my bucket is full, and there's like a little splishy splash because most of it was kind of dry heaving, but like an energetic, symbolic purge and release. All of them are awesome. I kind of figure in working with Aya, we're going to purge one way or another. But one of the mysteries is why we don't always purge in a vomiting sort of way. Because that's always kind of one of the big things is, am I going to purge tonight? And when am I going to be the first one to purge? Because somebody's got to get the party started. But that can often make someone self-conscious, especially if they're new, if they're the first one to make noise. And are you allowed to make noise on the purge? Yes. At least in my ceremonies, I'm like, roar like a lion if you need to, get it out, because that is actually part of how we purge, is allowing the noise to be made. I know when I first started drinking medicine, I tried really hard to be like a goldfish jumping into a bowl. And I was contracting in that and not allowing that. And when I finally gave myself permission in the space, it was a much more complete release. So, but not everybody is going to purge in their bucket or use their bucket every night, which goes to show that ayahuasca isn't a guaranteed purgative. It is so mysterious as to the timing, why and when and what it is that we release, because it's not as if she's just like an immediate like volcano of release and saying, we're getting rid of all of it. There's a divine timing to it that is part of the mystery of her intelligence. And, just can't really say with any certainty why it is that maybe, some people will go many, many ceremonies without an actual sort of like physical purge. And some of us purge every time, maybe multiple times in a ceremony. You can't do it wrong. That's the good news. There's no way to, get it wrong in an ayahuasca ceremony. But it's also completely unpredictable. So much of who she is unpredictable. So I think it speaks to the intelligence of the plant overall that we just never know who's gonna be able to have the gift of that release, when and why. And then there's the piece around, do we know what we're purging? Sometimes, at least for me, sometimes I know exactly what I'm purging. And I can say the thing that I probably purge the most is fear, because I've had a lot of it. And, that feels good to get another level of fear out into the bucket. Sometimes it too, whatever it is that we're purging, sometimes that's a mystery as well. I've had many people tell me that they didn't know what they were purging until it showed itself in the bucket. Sometimes we see past memories or images or symbols. Like, I know that might be a bit grotesque to people new to this, but it's pretty magical. And sometimes your purge reveals back like what it is that was released. And it's incredible when we get to connect to the awareness of what we're letting go, but it's not required. So that's a question that comes up a lot with people is, in order for me to really be clear of whatever is removed, whether it's toxicity, emotional baggage, trauma, etc., do we have to really be aware of it? And I think the good news is that no, it does not have to be a conscious awareness for us to still be in a more healed and whole state. It's wonderful, you know, especially in regards to how the mind feels. Like the mind likes to know. All of us have minds that love being in on something. And so it's awesome when that's available, but it's not required. And so that too is part of the mystery. Is why is it that sometimes we're really clear on what we released, and why is it sometimes unknown? Sometimes we don't know what it is that we purged until weeks or months after the ceremony, and we notice that something has shifted in how we're responding to life, or something has shifted in how we carry and feel connected to our bodies. So that's all just part of the mystery, but it's really, really neat once you make the connection of like, I purged some fear and it shows up in my life. You know, sometimes it's not clear. That's okay too. I mean, my perspective is when there's a purge coming on in whatever way it's coming in an ayahuasca ceremony, whatever that is, we don't want it anymore. Whatever it is, it's an honor and a privilege to release it. I remember when I was first sitting with ayahuasca regularly and I was trying to understand this mysterious purge thing, I sat next to a guy one night that purged all night long, like just nonstop, dry heaving, volume, etc. So I got curious at the end of the ceremony and I asked him, I'm like, hey brother, why were you purging all night? And he did not miss a beat. I remember he looked at me and he said, well, because I know I have to divorce my wife and I don't want to. And I was fighting it all night, which broke my heart because it's super relatable, you know, both the awareness that the relationship wasn't aligned and, you know, the desire to fight that. And I bring that in because as much as we know, the game with ayahuasca is supposed to be about surrender. And of course, that includes the relationship with the purge. That is very much easier said than done. So that too, I feel like we can't do wrong. We go in with this intention to let go and something wants to come out, you know, we're completely surrendered. I mean, I've had it happen that I purged without flexing a single muscle. It's just, boop. I have also had it that I fought like hell, like that gentleman that sat next to me, because, you know, that there's this association like he had. Sometimes we know that we're coming into an awareness of something, because when we purge, we often create space for something else to come in. It's sometimes the part of the ceremony where things get really expansive and clear. Not always, but it's awesome when that happens. However, it might not always be news that we want to come in. So if you're purging the entanglement of a relationship that doesn't serve you anymore, making space for that awareness, yeah, you can fight like hell. And that's okay too. You know, we do our best to be spacious and accepting these things that come in. And there's divine timing in that too, when we're ready to accept something like a big change that's in front of us. So if you've had the experience where you fought maybe multiple nights, the purge, there's beautiful reflected wisdom in that too. Again, we're doing our best. I have been there. I have fought like crazy too, all the while having, you know, the voice in my head going, Kat, you know, you're supposed to just let go and it'll feel better to release this. Again, easier said than done. But I will say that when it comes to the purge, the more we fight, the more it hurts, without a doubt. So let's talk about the discomfort. Because of course, I think most people are adverse to the purging aspect of ayahuasca because they're afraid of the discomfort that could come with it. There are many times I have purged without a single twinge of discomfort. And sometimes it's a surprise, you know, we'll be laid back having the journey and like, oh my God, here it comes. And it's like, boom, you know, up and out. Sometimes though, and these are the tough times, it takes a long time to move up. And there could be a lot of nausea or cramping or discomfort. So the advice that we share with people before ceremony about this is not necessarily the thing that our beautiful minds wants to hear. And that is, if we're in the space of working with ayahuasca and we're in a really, really uncomfortable physical, emotional, whatever space, the idea is to do the opposite of what we typically do in our daily lives. What we do in our daily lives is seek something to make it go away. Oh, I have nausea. What can I take to curb the nausea? You know, I have stomach cramping. How can I make it go away? With ayahuasca, you want to go deeper into it, because that, I think it's true always. Our body is obviously telling us something if we're uncomfortable, but especially in the context of working with a, you know, profoundly intelligent plant consciousness, is if the nausea is brewing and it's not going anywhere, it's not about going to the shaman and saying, hey, can you move this? Because sometimes we can. Most of the time, ayahuasca wants them to get a message. Because if we release something before we get the wisdom of it, it's probably going to come back in one shape or another. And so sometimes the journey up and out feels like a lifetime and is unbelievably uncomfortable. I mean, I've had the worst stomach pains, sweating bullets, just like begging for the purge to come, you know. Many a night hovered over the bucket, just waiting for the release. And you know, when people get stuck in that space in ceremony, that's what we do, is say, go into the pain, merge with the nausea, talk to it. What is it trying to express? Ask Aya, Mama, help. What's the message I need here? Like, when we're willing participants in that process, instead of pushing it away because it hurts, you know, like when we have that ability to be spacious with the discomfort, she rewards us in one way or another. You know, sometimes that's just the thing we need in order for the movement to happen and we get the release. Sometimes it's still going to take some time. Sometimes it continues days afterwards, right? It's just really, this healing process is unbelievably unpredictable. But we do ourselves a big favor if we can be with it and trust that there's some really sacred communication coming in. The release will come in one way or another. But the more that we fight it in wanting it to go away, we're resisting the wisdom of it. We're prolonging the suffering. And again, this is very easy to say and really hard to do when we're in that place of pain or discomfort of like, get this out. I don't advise most of the time trying to force the issue. That I've tried. I'm a former bulimic, so I'm a professional purger, you know, finger down the throat. Yeah, I know what I'm doing there. The first time I tried to do that with ayahuasca, she literally laughed at me and I heard her. I heard this cackling of like, ha, 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 nice try. It's not going to work. You know, you can't force this out. Every now and then somebody has been, you know, in that suffering portal for a long time, and I'll feel permission from the medicine to say, hey, you can try to release, but 99% of the time, we don't advise trying to force it, because if we don't get the message, it's gonna come back. And I'll tell you how I know this unequivocally is in the beginning of my training, I worked with a shaman briefly who would give people really, really concentrated salt water when they were in a really difficult process to force the purge. And I went into a really, really difficult process one night, and they took me into the bathroom and they offered me the salt water. And at first I was like, no, that seems like it's cheating. But you know, they reflected back something about me not wanting the help. So I grabbed it, downed it, and I purged my guts out, and I did feel better. But I didn't close the loop. I knew I hadn't gotten the message. And the next day I did ceremony again, and I went right back into the same place because my work was definitely not done. And that time I just stayed with it until the organic release happened. So even if it works temporarily when we force something out, the healing loop does not get to complete itself. So I really advise being with it, as difficult and uncomfortable as that can be. Sometimes it it is just up and out, and it's a beautiful, graceful process. But it's those times where we get to feel the discomfort of things coming through that is really, really challenging. Got a couple questions in chat I'm going to address. So Jose's asking, is the drunk head spinning feeling part of the purging process or an indicator that you had too much medicine or something else? Ooh, the head spinning. I think that's an indication you had just the right amount of medicine, because that is it's definitely part of the purging process, but we don't always purge when that happens. That can just happen because the medicine is good and strong. To me, that's an indication that the mind is losing its grip on the idea of control. Because usually the head is spinning and also the visions are off the chart, or, the insights are coming. And I call that, what I call that? The G-force effect. Because it's like, whoa, your medicine's really strong. It's like as if we're leaving this atmosphere and going into her dimension. And the head spinning can often come with nausea because of the G-force effect, but it doesn't always go together. But I think that's a perfect amount of medicine, because we're totally getting out of our normal sort of base space of consciousness where we feel in control. Not that that's easy, because when that starts coming in for me, even still, sometimes I'm looking for handlebars or something of like, uh-oh, here we go. But that's when I know she's got the wheel. Like, I've lost it. And although it's uncomfortable, it's the space where a lot of magic can happen, and with or without the purge. So that's, my 2 cents about that crazy spinning feeling. Mags is asking, what about drinking a little water to help get it moving? For example, after a lot of dry heaving. That's a great question, because every tradition is different with the relationship with water. Some traditions say you shouldn't have any water the entire ceremony. In the tradition that I study and carry, yeah, water can be really helpful, especially because a lot of times we're doing this work in very dry environments, and it's important to stay hydrated for all kinds of reasons. So I encourage definitely sips of water, not gulps of water. The only caveat to that is we ask people not to drink water the 20 minutes after they just drank a cup of medicine, because it can bring on the purge too quickly before she has a chance to really get into our systems and, just create unnecessary discomfort. Outside of that, yeah, water can often help. You know what else can help is, if somebody's been sitting with that energy of discomfort for a while, sometimes hape is a really good medicine to go to, as long as it feels like it's aligned, that it's time. If somebody's been uncomfortable for 5 minutes and they come up for hape, it's like, no, you got to sit with it for a while longer. But if it really feels stuck and they've sat with that for 30 minutes, an hour plus, hape is beautiful, but it's often the last thing we want when we are crampy and nauseous and spinning and in that intense portal. But it can be quite the powerful mover of that energy. So for me personally, when I'm in that space and I know it's time for hape, it's not good news. It is afterwards when I'm finally like, feel so much better, but it takes a lot of courage to then get some stuff up your nose in order to move that energy. And of course, it doesn't always work, but that one's a close to a guarantee that it's going to move some energy. You said you were given hape last time after hours in that same loop, and it helped me a lot. Yeah. It certainly can. It's just hard to get up the courage and the energy to be like, okay, I'm going to get some strong hape on top of everything else. But yeah, it can be a godsend. Let me see. What didn't I remember? So I was talking a bit about sometimes we know what we're purging. And so I was just going to give some examples of things that we can purge, and some examples of the things that we want to purge versus what we don't. And what I mean by that is, this is why we have a diet, a protocol that we ask people to follow, because you do not want to purge the burger and fries you had yesterday. You want to purge the trauma from childhood, as an example. So this is why we prepare our bodies, so that there's just clean food and energy, so that when ayahuasca gets to the root of something, we're purging some baggage that we don't want to carry anymore, not the horrible meal that we had a day or two before. I mentioned I purged a lot of fear. Ironically, I've also purged bulimia. And I say ironically because bulimia, of course, involves a lot of purging. When I first got to the jungle, the first time I sat, I was deep in my bulimic stage. So I wasn't afraid of the purge at all. And guess what she did? She didn't let me purge because I was all ready. It was like, I got this part, you know, everybody's worried about the purge. I'm a professional. I didn't get to for quite some time because she was reflecting the karma to me of being a girl obsessed with controlling input and output of food. I do remember when I purged bulimia, you know, was it the final time? Pretty close to the end of my journey with bulimia. It was after 4 consecutive nights of insane physical pain, stomach pain. I finally got the message somewhere around the halfway point of the 4th night that it was my karma. And she was like, look, now that you know what this causes, you know, the damage to my body and my spirit and all of the, just the danger around being bulimic that I was pretty naive to, that got my attention, the insane amount of pain I went through. And she told me right before the purge, she's like, all right, we're going to let this go. You're going to purge this. But if you decide to come back to the choice of being bulimic, it only gets worse from here, sweetheart. So get the message. And I did. I got the message good because I think that's what I needed in order to understand what I was doing to my body and the damage it was causing. And it was kind of unforgettable because it was excruciating. And then the purge was one of the most profound releases I'd ever felt. I felt, you know, like I think what came in to replace that was just this big, huge blast of self-love. Because I was like, I love myself enough now to let this go. Because she, by the way, just to give a little more context, because it feels important to share, like what she had to walk me through is the acceptance that I would probably gain weight, which was like the thing I was most afraid of because I was obsessed with looking like whatever, you know, society wanted me to look like. But she had walked me through all of these things by then that, okay, I can handle all of this. And it was sincere in me. So because I had done enough healing to build a foundation of self-love, it was time to become very aware of the ramifications of the bulimia and then to commit to moving forward without that being part of my life. So it's just kind of this interesting progression that often happens with these big things. And this was 4.5 years into my relationship with ayahuasca. So it took me a long, long time to get to the point where I was even ready to confront that. But it felt so good to basically have one last bulimic purge, even though it wasn't forced on my part. It was so symbolic, and that, and yeah, it was cause for celebration. I mentioned a lot of times what we're purging is actually physical. You know, people in our ceremonies have purged things like diabetes, have purged even cancer. I sat next to a woman who had stage 4 breast cancer, and she knew when she released it. I purged my migraine headaches, like all kinds of interesting physical healings that happen. But I think, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the purge, the bucket purge is more often trauma, emotional baggage, even past life stuff, which, by the way, I'm going to talk about past life release and working with past life trauma and ayahuasca in the next webinar later this month. But yeah, you can purge past life stuff. You can let go, really. You can channel ancestral energy and purge on behalf of other people. That happens a lot in ceremony. I had one night where I was exhausted laying on the ground and I knew there was a purge coming up. And I looked at the guy next to me and it's like he knew. He looked at me and he purged, and it was for me, and I knew it. And we talked about it later. I was like, thanks, man. I couldn't sit up. That kind of stuff happens. The interconnectivity of all of us in these spaces, it's just incredible. So, you know, the purge is not just personal. It can be for anybody in our field, in the ceremony space, ancestors, etc., whether or not we know it. Let's see. I want to make sure I'm getting all the questions in chat. Lara purged your mother through screaming like an insane motherfucker. It was such a miraculous experience, the hardest thing I had to endure in my entire life, but so necessary. Yeah, love, you're sort of articulating how when you're in it, it sucks. It sucks. You know, these are the moments where sometimes we do the thing of saying, I am never drinking this crap again. This is awful. And then we have the breakthrough afterwards. We get to feel what comes in place of that darkness, of that pain. And yeah, it's totally worth it. But it's no joke when it's balls out release, whether it's screaming or crying or purging, et cetera, and it feels completely out of control. But that's why mama takes the wheel and helps us like do this, because we probably wouldn't agree to it consciously. Julia says smoking mapacho and asking it for assistance in removing blockages and letting go can help release through the purge too. Yeah, good old Grandpa Mapacho in all his forms is incredibly helpful in this way. I mentioned hape, but absolutely working with mapacho smoke. And then there's the classic tobacco tea purge, which doesn't happen in an ayahuasca ceremony. A lot of times we work with sacred tobacco for a good, hard cleansing purge like this before a ceremony as a vomitivo. Because it's lovely to work with something like mapacho tea before ceremony, because that way when we drop in with ayahuasca, sometimes it removes some of the density and we can just have a big, beautiful journey rather than, you know, the uncomfortable purge. Not that it's a guarantee, but mapacho is an incredible purgative medicine. Tricky part of him, of course, is that it's a fine line between a good, beautiful, hard, healthy purge and toxicity. So if you work with mapacho in this capacity, you want to work with somebody who is well-versed on just the dosage and how to bring in that intensity without creating any danger for us, because purging can have its dangers. You know, not everybody has the health to have a good hard purge like that. If you have issues with your esophagus, breathing issues, there's different things that, you know, a good practitioner will make sure that you don't have an issue with in order to make sure the purge is actually healthy. This is actually one of the reasons, if you've ever heard that people with epilepsy or a history of seizures are not good candidates for working with ayahuasca, it's not because the seizures themselves are dangerous. She can trigger a seizure, but that's usually manageable. It's because of the danger of purging at the same time of having a seizure. Same thing with people who have narcolepsy or issues just staying alert. We'd have to have somebody watching them the entire ceremony in order to make sure they're safe. Because of course, if we're laying down, if we're asleep and we purge, we can asphyxiate. So that's just one of the dangers of purging, which is one of the reasons why I like to make sure the space is lit with some candles so that I can watch the people that are laying down and make sure they're not going into a process and not aware that the purge comes up. This doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. And it's one of the only really dangerous aspects of the purge, is to make sure that they're sitting up, which is why we encourage people to stay seated when the medicine is good and strong. Sometimes we want to lay down when that spinny feeling hits, but it can be a long way up when the purge comes. And then sometimes we miss our buckets and, you know, chaos ensues. So yeah, so overall though, you know, those are the only like core reasons why the purging itself could be dangerous, especially with mapacho, because that's not a light purge. Jose's asking thoughts on purging for someone else, like for a spouse or a sibling. Yeah, I can talk about that more. My personal philosophy in doing this work a lot is that I'm very protective of all of us to protect our vessels, even on behalf of the people we really love. But sometimes it just feels like it's safe and that we're up for it. I never want us to do to agree to purge something for somebody that we love out of obligation. I want us to do it because we feel strong and we feel healthy and capable. And of course, we're doing it because we love this person. So that said, if the opportunity comes to purge something on behalf of someone else and you feel up for it and strong, and it's not out of a sense of, I have to do this, heck yeah, it's beautiful. And I know you have a story that aligns with this being effective. And I know many stories of all of us willing to purge on behalf of someone else, and it has an effect. which is incredible. I'll tell one example. Probably the most incredible story I have witnessed is an old medicine sister of mine has a son who is schizophrenic. So he's obviously not a candidate to drink ayahuasca. She talked to our shaman and asked, would it be okay if I channeled some of the energy that he carries and see if we can bring in some healing? And my teacher was like, you can, but this is going to be really intense and difficult. Are you sure you're ready? And she was. And she drank the medicine many, many times. And so he sang and doctored her one night. And she had one of the biggest purges I've ever witnessed. And it didn't cure her son by any means, but he got better to the point where he could move out of the assisted living facility he was in and have some independence. Like there was a significant shift in the healing that he experienced. So it works. Sometimes, we never know, but it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to do, especially on behalf of somebody who either isn't called to the medicine or can't drink the medicine. But, only if we know that we're strong enough to do so. Okay, Rashni's saying, is it true that different types of purging can relate to releasing different types of trauma? I read that shivering, for example, can relate to childhood trauma. Yeah, thank you. I forgot to mention shaking, one of my favorite ways to purge. Yeah, shaking in particular, because it is tied to a nervous system response. Because if we were creatures in nature acting in a present moment, integrity with our nervous systems, we would shake like crazy after we get out of a dangerous situation. I just recently watched a video with, I think it was an antelope, who got caught by a big cat. For whatever reason, the cat released him. And once he knew he was safe and out of danger, he went through this whole shaking wave-like process and then got up and started munching on grass as if nothing happened. That's what we're supposed to do as humans when we get into a place of safety after going through something traumatic, is to let our bodies release it, let that adrenaline run through and the imprint of the trauma to come out, up and out our nervous systems. So shaking in particular is absolutely, typically tied to a release of trauma. There might be a different reason the medicine would bring in a purge like that. We never know until we're in the moment, but I have shaked a lot. And I can say unequivocally, at least 90% of the time, it has been a traumatic release. So the purge, the vomiting purge, is often a blockage of some sort, energetic speaking. I mentioned that the downward purge is more typically a toxic release, something actually physical in our bodies that is being released. Not to be too graphic, but we're talking about purging here is like, there's sometimes when we do a downward purge and sometimes I'm like, look, I've had a banana and a slice of pineapple today. And the purge is like I ate an all you can eat buffet at like a Vegas casino. I'm like, where's that coming from? It's her capacity to really clean us out, and of course our bodies can hold on to things in any of our systems that haven't been able to really flush out and release. So, quite often that is a toxic, like physical cleansing. Crying can be an emotional release of sadness or trauma. It can also be joy. There's such a connection to our lymphatic release also being a place of gratitude and happiness, which is, by the way, why I always tell people before we start a ceremony, please don't judge a book by its cover. You may see somebody purging and crying and in a process that looks really painful or difficult on the outside, but their interior experience may be like, thank God I'm releasing this. I've been that girl purging a bad relationship and it looked absolutely horrendous on the outside, and my interior experience was so blissful and grateful just to get it out. So things are not always what they seem, but that's the best way I can sort of generalize the reasons why each purges connect to a certain part of release, shaking in particular. So Jody says, you've ever only had one tiny vomit in ceremony, though you've had lots of crying and bleeding purges. Ooh, that's a good one too. And you're afraid on some unconscious level that your Catholic shame about revealing bodily movements in public is preventing you from purging in that way. Is it possible that you can prevent a purge, a vomit purge from happening, or will she do it regardless? Oh, we can fight it. Great question. Yeah, we can fight it on some level, but if it's really, really imperative to our well-being, she'll get it out on some level too. Because at the end of the day, ayahuasca is always stronger than we are. She might show us the karma, the repercussions of fighting or healing, because quite often that's going to show up in our lives in more than one way, not just in ceremony, fighting the purge, but the kind of Catholic guilt that you were speaking of. As an ex-Catholic, I completely understand. So she might let us win, so to speak, and not allow the purge, because she wants us to kind of see how that kind of behavior is affecting us across the board, as an example. But if she wants it to happen, we're not going to win. We can't fight it regardless. There are times where she gives us the power of choice. There are, and it sounds like you've experienced that. But if you're crying and bleeding and doing beautiful releases, that counts. That totally counts. That might be all that was needed. The vomiting purge is just one way. So Mags is asking, what do I think about facilitators intervening when someone is uncontrollably purging through talking, shouting, laughing, continuously making a lot of noise on the basis of it being disruptive to other participants? Oh, good question. Because this one's really, really tricky when you're the one sitting behind the altar. Because on the one hand, we want to let people have their process. I don't want to intervene. Like if somebody's in the middle of releasing a massive experience of trauma and it's loud and disruptive, I don't want to intervene and stop that beautiful process from happening. That said, it can be disruptive, right? So I can only answer what I look for and listen for. When somebody's in a deep process and there's a level of disruption happening in this space, I'm listening for a couple of things. First of all, if it's going to continue to escalate, because sometimes it reaches a crescendo and you can just sort of feel like, okay, that's going to taper off, but sometimes it has this element of being really out of control, to the point where, what I'm listening for is that person nearing what we'll call a psychotic break. Are they leaving the building completely? And then what's left is someone who is no longer conscious and acting out in that energy. We do everything we can to prevent that, because it creates danger for the person that has kind of schismed, and of course for the space too. And so if that kind of crescendo sort of energy is happening, we won't go to intervene necessarily. We'll go to help keep the person stable by singing to them, by using some of the shamanic tools of, but the way I envision it always is that I'm calling that soul back into that body, is stay connected, don't leave us. I will sometimes even say that, come back, sweetheart, come back, like whispering, but they hear. And so that's a time where we'll step in, but not out of trying to stop the process, but keeping a level of stability. We have different ways that we can sort of energetically clean the space without making it obvious that we're trying to make someone quiet down. I've got a couple songs in my toolkit that silence the room, but not in a direct way of shaming somebody, because that's really one of the most important things that I carry in the ceremony space. I never want to shame anyone for anything. We're doing our best. I've been the girl losing my shit before, and that was what my best looked like. And I was sorry to disrupt the space, but I couldn't stop it. So I never want anybody to feel ashamed. But the tricky part of what you're asking, Mags, is that these processes that people can get in that kind of release, they can be contagious. So that's the next thing I'm listening for, is it popping around the room? Laughter is a perfect example. Laughter is contagious. It's a wonderful thing to have in this space, but it can quickly go from a release to a domino effect that turns the space into like a kindergarten room where everybody's giggling kind of uncontrollably, which again is a beautiful sound, but it can disrupt the space. So if there is a domino effect happening, we'll get up with a shakapa, and just kind of clean the space and sing or do something to try to bring the energies back down, because we don't want everything to disrupt. But if a person is having a big process and it's not contagious, and they're not in this place of feeling like it might crescendo into something more serious, I usually just let it play out. Because part of what we're all doing when we're sitting in ceremony together is holding space for each other. And sometimes it's time to hold space for somebody having a process. That might be us next time. So it is a privilege to get to hold that. And if we're annoyed by it or in any way upset, that's often a lesson the medicine is bringing in for us too. All I ask of people before we start ceremony is do your best. If you can contain the noise that wants to come through you, fantastic. If you can't, that's okay. Because the last thing I'll mention that we do sometimes is if somebody is, in a long process and there's a lot of noise or disruption, we might just come and take them outside, have one of the, the guardians or the assistants come and let them continue the process outside, somewhat removed from the ceremony space. But sometimes the person can't walk, they don't even have the mobility, in which case, then we let it play out. And the last reason we let it play out is if the person feels like they might be a threat to us. I feel into the energy of the ego having the process. Now, 9 times out of 10, the energy of that person is one of desperation, of fear, of needing help. But every now and again, there's a sort of an arrogant fight energy. And if I feel unsafe in approaching that person, and it's only happened a handful of times, but it has happened, I'm just going to hold the space and let it play out too, and not try to create conflict, because that's the last thing any sacred space needs. So those are the things we're trying to feel into, doing our best to listen to the communications from the medicine. Not about disrupting, it's about, holding the container, honoring the individual process, but also being aware of everyone else's experience too. And it's always a dance of just trying to just do right by everyone in that regard. But it's such a good question. Oh, you had a follow-up. You said this happened in a retreat you're at recently where the person in question was very distracting and you felt like he was so far gone that he couldn't consciously control it, yet the facilitators repeatedly went over to ask him to quiet down. Okay, here's something about what you just shared. I don't think I'll say hardly ever works to go to somebody having sort of an outburst process like that and tell them to quiet down, because that's the energy of shame. And when I experience this in people, when they're cracked open like that and they're outwardly processing, the shame makes it worse because it's control. You come in and try to control it, that sort of rebellious energy that is the reason why there's been an external process to begin with, often gets louder. So I never do it that way. I never go over and say, hey man, could you quiet down? Instead, if they're able, if they're verbal, I'll be like, hey, sweetheart, what's happening? Can you talk to me about what you're processing? Try to divert the energy. If they're not verbal, if they're really, really in that deep process and they can't even really converse in that way, then we'll sing. Really, it's the songs that can bring them back into a conscious, grounded space more often than not. But I will never say, hey, please be quiet, because it doesn't work. And it also brings in that element of like shame, and that just never feels good. Yeah, you're so welcome. Yeah, Samantha, you were shamed in that way, and you still need to purge that shame. Yeah, look at the irony of that. We're trying to purge, and then if we get shamed, now we have more to purge at a later date, because shame is one of the biggest things that we release in that process. In my training as a facilitator, that's, as I mentioned earlier, that's the most important piece in terms of being a safe container holder, a safe space holder. Is no, there's going to be no shame no matter what happens, because I always do hold we're doing our best no matter what. And sometimes our best is messy, and that's okay. There's no reason to shame that. So yeah, I'm so sorry that happened. It sucks to add to the things we have to purge. Let's see. Gosh, I think I covered everything. Awesome. Anybody else have any questions? Julia said, instead of trying to quiet them down, reminding them to trust the medicine and say it over and over, or focus on the Icaros can be enough to bring them back to where they need to be and what the medicine is showing them. That's exactly what I do, is just distract into the invitation to be a part of the ceremony in a different way, to sing to them, to use that vibration, but not to, directly basically scold and try to control. Yeah, that just doesn't feel good. Oh, you're so welcome, everybody. Huh. Yeah, any last questions about the beautiful process of purging with these medicines? Thank you all. Well, as I mentioned, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be doing another webinar on past life trauma, which in part involves purging, but just how the medicine, ayahuasca in particular, helps to kind of tap into things that have happened in our soul's journey. And I'll probably address, Jose, what you brought in, is talking more about being a channel for helping to clear energies, whether it's in our lineage or in our immediate, family, loved ones, and how to be safe in doing that, how to be really discerning. But thank you so much, everyone. I hope to see you next time. Have a beautiful rest of your day. And yeah, I really appreciate all of the beautiful questions. See you soon. Bye.